What happens when you take one of the most talented two-way players in the NBA and drop him into 4 completely different team cultures? Jimmy Butler just gave us the answer, and it's about to shatter everything you thought you knew about building championship teams. This isn't just another trade story. This is a decade-long experiment that proves culture doesn't just beat talent, it transforms it entirely. The basketball world is still processing Butler's shocking trade to Golden State in February 2025. But here's what nobody's talking about. This move represents the final chapter in the most revealing culture vs. talent case study the NBA has ever seen. And the results are absolutely wild. Let's start with what culture actually means, because everyone throws this word around like confetti at a championship parade. Miami Heat culture isn't just Pat Riley's slicked back hair and those cryptic motivational quotes painted on practice facility walls. It's a system that takes raw talent and either amplifies it to championship levels or completely destroys careers trying. The Heat built their reputation on transforming players who didn't fit anywhere else into essential championship pieces. Udonis Haslem went from undrafted to franchise cornerstone. Tyler Johnson became a $50 million player. Hassan Whiteside resurrected his career from overseas. But here's the kicker. For every success story, there's a Dion Waiters suspension or a Justice Winslow experiment gone wrong. Miami's culture demands one thing above everything else: complete surrender to the system. You don't just buy into Heat culture, you become it. And that's exactly where Jimmy Butler's story gets fascinating, because he's never surrendered to anything in his entire career. But that's only the beginning of this story. When Butler landed in Miami in 2019, something unprecedented happened. The guy who had burned bridges in 3 consecutive cities suddenly looked like the perfect culture fit. Those back-to-back finals runs in 2020 and 2023 weren't accidents. They were Butler operating at his absolute peak when culture and talent aligned perfectly. Remember that 2020 playoff run? Butler averaged 26 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists, while dragging a roster of cast-offs and developmental players to within 2 games of a championship against the Lakers in the bubble. That wasn't just talent. That was talent amplified by a culture that gave him complete freedom to be exactly who he needed to be. The 2023 finals run might have been even more impressive. Butler's legendary performances against Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals, including that Game 6 masterpiece where he scored 47 points, represented something we rarely see in modern basketball. A superstar fully embracing a culture, while that culture completely empowered his unique skill set. Here's what made Miami different from Butler's previous stops. They never tried to change him. Chicago wanted him to be quieter. Minnesota needed him to be more diplomatic. Philadelphia expected him to fit their timeline. Miami said, "Be Jimmy Butler, but be the best possible version of yourself." And what happened next changed everything. To understand why Butler's Miami chapter matters so much, you need to see the pattern that started in Chicago. The Bulls drafted Butler 30th overall in 2011, and for years he was everything they could have wanted. Defensive intensity, work ethic that bordered on obsession, leadership that elevated teammates. But here's where it gets interesting. Chicago's culture was built on hierarchy and veteran deference. Butler wasn't supposed to become the alpha. That role belonged to Derrick Rose, then to veterans like Pau Gasol and Dwayne Wade during their brief returns. But talent has a way of demanding recognition, and Butler's elite two-way play couldn't be contained by organizational expectations. The breaking point came during that infamous 2016-17 season. Butler was averaging 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists while playing elite defense, but he was also calling out teammates publicly and questioning coaching decisions. Chicago's front office faced a choice: rebuild the culture around their best player or preserve the existing hierarchy. They chose hierarchy. Butler got traded to Minnesota for Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and the 7th overall pick. On paper, Chicago got decent value. In reality, they traded away a player entering his prime for a rebuilding package that still hasn't delivered a playoff appearance. But here's the wild part. Chicago's decision might have been right for their culture, even if it was wrong for winning basketball games. Minnesota represented Butler's first real test as the undisputed leader of a franchise culture. The Timberwolves hadn't made the playoffs since 2004, and they were betting everything on Butler's ability to transform not just their roster, but their entire organizational mindset. For exactly one season, it worked perfectly. The 2017-18 Timberwolves went 47-35 and snapped that 14-year playoff drought. Butler averaged 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists, while anchoring an elite defense alongside Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. Minnesota looked like they had found their foundation for the next decade. Then came the most revealing moment of Butler's entire career, that practice session from hell in October 2018. Butler demanded a trade, showed up to practice, and proceeded to dominate the starters while playing with third-string players. "You fucking need me," he screamed at teammates and coaches. "You can't win without me." The basketball world called it unprofessional. Butler called it honest. And here's the thing, he was absolutely right. Minnesota's culture was built on potential rather than performance, on being comfortable rather than being challenged. Towns was making max money while playing inconsistent defense. Wiggins had natural talent but lacked killer instinct. The organization was celebrating making the playoffs instead of demanding championship-level excellence. Butler's explosion wasn't about ego. It was about incompatible cultures colliding at maximum velocity. Minnesota wanted to be good enough. Butler demanded greatness. Those two philosophies cannot coexist. And here's where things get really wild. Philadelphia seemed like the perfect solution. The 76ers had championship aspirations, a culture built on the process, and superstars who understood pressure. Joel Embiid was establishing himself as a dominant two-way center. Ben Simmons was a versatile playmaker. The organization had spent years building toward exactly this moment. Butler's 2018-19 season in Philadelphia was statistically solid. 18 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists on elite efficiency while playing his usual suffocating defense. The playoffs were even better, averaging 19 points while helping push Toronto to 7 games in the Eastern Conference semifinals. That Kawhi Leonard shot that bounced 4 times before falling, Butler was inches away from advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals. But behind the scenes, cultural fractures were already forming. Butler's intensity clashed with Ben Simmons' laid-back approach. His veteran leadership conflicted with Joel Embiid's emotional leadership style. The organization wanted Butler to be a complementary star, but his skill set demanded a more central role. The breaking point came during contract negotiations. Philadelphia could offer Butler a 5-year, $190 million max extension. He walked away to sign a 4-year, $142 million deal with Miami. Butler left $48 million on the table to find a culture that matched his competitive fire. Think about that for a second. A player in his prime chose culture over the largest possible contract. That decision alone should tell you everything about what really drives championship success. But that wasn't the end of the story. Miami represented something completely different. A culture that had already proven it could transform individual talent into championship-level team success. Pat Riley's Heat had won titles with completely different roster constructions, from the Shaq and Wade era to the Big Three with LeBron and Bosh. The genius of Heat culture wasn't demanding conformity, it was demanding excellence while allowing individual expression within that framework. Butler could be as intense as he wanted during practice, as vocal as he needed with teammates, as uncompromising as his competitive nature demanded. Miami's culture absorbed that intensity and redirected it toward championship pursuit. Those back-to-back finals runs weren't coincidental. Butler averaged 21.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists during the 2020 playoffs while playing every position and guarding every type of offensive threat. The 2023 playoff run was even more impressive. 24.7 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 5.3 assists while eliminating the number 1 seeded Bucks and taking Boston to 7 games. But here's what made those runs special. Butler wasn't carrying Miami despite their culture, he was thriving because of it. Eric Spoelstra's system maximized Butler's unique combination of scoring, playmaking, and defensive versatility. The organizational philosophy matched his relentless approach to improvement. The veteran leadership structure gave him the freedom to push teammates without organizational backlash. For 4.5 seasons, culture and talent achieved perfect harmony in Miami. And then, something shifted that nobody saw coming. The collapse happened faster than anyone expected. By January 2025, Butler was demanding trades and getting suspended for conduct detrimental to the team. The same player who had thrived under Heat culture for years suddenly couldn't coexist with the organization that had maximized his talents. What changed? Butler's relationship with the culture remained the same, but his role within that culture had evolved. Miami's roster construction had shifted from Jimmy Butler plus complementary pieces to Jimmy Butler competing with other stars for touches. Tyler Herro's emergence as a 25-point scorer, Bam Adebayo's expanded offensive role, and various veteran additions created role confusion that even Heat culture couldn't solve. The February trade to Golden State represented the final proof point. Butler didn't leave Miami because he couldn't handle their culture. He left because culture alone isn't enough when roster construction undermines individual success. Even the most compatible culture-talent fit can break down when organizational priorities shift. Miami received Andrew Wiggins, Davion Mitchell, and Kyle Anderson in return. On paper, they got solid role players who fit their system. In reality, they traded away their best player because maintaining culture became more important than maximizing talent. And here's the shocking truth that changes everything. Jimmy Butler's journey through 4 franchises proves that culture doesn't actually beat talent. Culture transforms talent into either championship-level excellence or complete organizational dysfunction. The same player who was called a locker room cancer in Minnesota became a finals hero in Miami. The same intensity that destroyed relationships in Chicago elevated teammates in South Beach. Butler's talent never changed. His competitive drive remained constant, his leadership approach stayed consistent. What changed was the organizational culture's ability to channel those traits toward winning basketball. Chicago couldn't handle his alpha mentality. Minnesota couldn't match his championship expectations. Philadelphia couldn't accommodate his need for a central role. Miami maximized everything for 4 years until roster construction created irreconcilable conflicts. The lesson isn't that culture beats talent, it's that culture and talent must align perfectly for sustained success. Butler's elite two-way play needed a culture that embraced intensity over comfort, championship pursuit over regular season success, individual accountability over collective excuses. Golden State represents the ultimate test of this theory. The Warriors have won 4 championships with a culture built on ball movement, defensive switching, and veteran leadership. Butler brings elite talent that could either complement their system perfectly or disrupt the chemistry that made them successful. But here's the real question nobody's asking. What does Butler's journey tell us about every other superstar in the NBA? How many championship-caliber talents are wasting away in cultures that can't maximize their abilities? How many organizations are prioritizing cultural comfort over the uncomfortable excellence required for championship success? The Jimmy Butler experiment isn't over. It's entering its most revealing phase. Whether Golden State can integrate his talent into their culture will determine if we've learned anything from the most comprehensive culture versus talent case study in NBA history. Because if the Warriors can make this work, it proves that elite cultures don't just beat talent, they transform talented individuals into championship dynasties. And that might be the most important lesson the NBA has learned in decades.